we're all human and we should all care. Because eventually, when you are building a startup, it's beyond the coding, beyond the science, beyond the AI. You're trying to change someone's behavior, right? Like you developed a new product and you want to sell it. You are in a process of behavioral change, whether it's for a company or individual. Treat every meeting as an opportunity to build relationship. You have no idea how life are gonna turn out, who's gonna leave what company. I've seen so many people finding jobs, getting investors, just from all these meetings because they showed up. Like you need to be on top of your game, but you also need to be human. That's where magic happens.
Welcome to the Invisible Ink podcast. I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, Chief Financial Storyteller at Achieve. Our guest for today is Dr. Maria Blekher. Dr. Maria Blekher is a behavioral scientist, a venture strategist, and co-founder and managing partner at Serendipity Impact VC, an early-stage fund investing in technologies transforming mental and neurohealth. She has more than 15 years' experience in consumer behavior, go-to-market strategy, and startup growth. Previously, she founded the U Innovation Lab that helped introduce over 70 Israeli startups into the North American market. Dr. Blekher serves on the boards of multiple mental health initiatives. She has a PhD and MBA from Ben-Gurion University and was a visiting scholar at NYU's Stern School of Business. Now, here's Dr. Blekher. Hello, Maria. Welcome to Invisible Ink. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Shubha.
So we have a bunch of really exciting stuff that I don't think we've ever talked about at this podcast before. So before we get into all of that, can you just tell us a little bit about your background? I know you're now in VC, but you weren't always in VC. Can you just give us a little bit about your past?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a bit of unconventional path for a venture capitalist. I'm coming from the behavioral science academically, so I have a PhD in consumer behavior, spent a couple of years trying to really understand how people are making decisions, and then very, very quickly pivoted into the entrepreneurial world because research is amazing, but I think we as humans are much more nuanced, and the business world is very complex and plays out very interestingly when it comes to actually implementing research outcomes. So I spent the vast majority of my career in the field working with early stage startups on their journey to the American market.
Great. And then how did you get into VC?
So after spending more than 5 years probably in the US, working with early stage founders, really seeing them developing incredible products and then struggling to make it to sales and to find go-to-market, I realized that there is something missing. And that something missing was, of course, the strategy. And then, as any founder knows, was the funding part. I will not use the word ideal, but the optimal way to go is probably to have outlined strategy and funding. And so I decided that that's going to be the next thing I'm going to do. Add the funding component to the strategy and the go-to-market and the other things I was working on while working with founders.
So it feels like the funding was like the missing link. So you had the strategy, you had the go-to-market, and the pieces that the companies were missing was the funding.
I would say that you can do a lot without money and without funding, but bottom line, sometimes to get things going, you do need funding. And I've seen many startups, especially in mental health and in brain health, that were struggling to fundraise. And we know the vast majority of startups fail, and many of them should have not raised funding. But those who should have were struggling to raise from traditional generalist VCs because the space was less familiar and more nuanced. And again, because that's my expertise and that's my mission, I decided that someone has to do that, and that might as well be me.
So which brings us to Serendipity, which is the firm that you co-founded. Can you just walk us through, I mean, mental health is a really broad area, right? What is your flavor? What is your twist to it? What is the focus? And where exactly do you want to play within that space?
Yeah, so mental health is very, very wide, and we're working within the mental health and the brain health. So it's even wider. We are working with founders that are solving some of the biggest challenges. So when I'm looking at the company, I'm looking at what is the problem it's solving and how painful is this problem. I'm being more specific. I'm looking at loneliness, autism, PTSD, drug-resistant epilepsy, very complex medical decision-making, ADHD. So very, very big pains that currently don't have solutions that are good enough.
And is there anything unique about the type of solutions or about a specific approach that appeals to you that you think is an opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking at technological solutions. There is a lot of drug discovery going on and a large variety of solutions to all the problems that I just mentioned. I'm focused on technology that is enabling solutions or that is solving this problem. So that's my take.
And not to belabor the point, but when you talk about technology, right? So digital health is a very big thing. And I could argue that that's technology too. Is that covered in your thesis, or is that something more directly applied than just, hey, here's a technology platform that we're going to help?
So I think that's a great question. And today, almost everything is technology. And I would say that digital health falls under the category. And obviously, we're all speaking about AI, and everything is AI powered. I can always say I'm focused on deep tech AI solutions. It can still be digital health. It can be a device. But the idea is that you really have some revolutionary tech that is grounded in science, less kind of nice to have applications, which are great. It's just not the focus of what we're doing. So deep tech, deep science, real solutions, major pains. That's what I would say is where we're focused.
I like that focus on the very deep tech, and also makes it much clearer. So I want to talk about what is happening in that field and why that's attractive to you. What are some of the trends that you're seeing happening, particularly with that deep science, deep tech focus that you just talked about, that's new now and that's disruptive?
Let's start with the market. The market is getting ready. We see more and more conversations about mental health and brain health in the headlines. We see more and more research about mental health and brain health wherever people are consuming their information. And so that's change number one. Things that prior to these times were, again, in the back rooms are now at the front. The other thing is that we see that the FDA is actually starting to clear digital solutions, which is news, and it enables companies and it encourages companies to develop these solutions because, well, there is a pathway, even a regulatory pathway that can be available today. And these are things that 5 years ago were just not in place. And the third one is what we're all experiencing with the development and acceleration of technology and AI. So AI today, and again, this is a buzzword and everything is AI, but it enables companies to achieve performances and unlock treatments that were not available 5 years ago, or that would take much longer. And today, again, you can see clinical results much faster. And so the tech is ready, the market is ready, we see the regulation coming together. And so I think all these components are kind of colliding in the time and space we're at.
That's great. So one quick question on that. So you talked about the regulatory pathways opening up. What are you saying in terms of the payers and their willingness to be able to reimburse these kinds of treatments or solutions?
It always comes back to who is going to pay for it and why, right? It's especially when we're speaking about healthcare. So first of all, we have the CPT codes, and you see more and more CPT codes that can be applied for various digital therapy solutions, which again opens an income pathway. That's number one. Second of all, we see the hospitals and the clinics seeking new solutions. So there is much more openness to innovation. I think when it linked to what we previously said. So the market is ready, the information is out there. People are listening to podcasts and they hear founders speaking about these new technologies and devices and processes that they develop to treat something, and they're seeking these solutions. And so we start seeing more and more clinics offering things that maybe previously were kind of off limits because you have the demand coming from the market. I would say with the caveat, we're at the beginning. There is a long way to go yet.
So coming to the startup side, right? You're talking about a very specific niche where there is this marriage of deep tech and the market side, which is, mental health. What are you seeing in terms of startups that are winning And what do you think are the winning factors, especially with this deep tech piece coming into the picture versus just what I'll call a general digital mental health type of solution?
So I would say, and I would tie deep tech with deep science. If we're looking to solve complex problems, very often they will need complex solutions that are tied back into science. And so if you have technology that is developed based on solid science and it actually solves a major problem, that's the first component. That's the deep tech. The second part, and what we're seeing is happening, is the problem itself. You have challenges today, and I can speak to drug-resistant epilepsy, that really don't have alternative solutions, or that the solutions that exist are just not good enough. So you have millions of people suffering with no real solution. So and really focusing on solving the problems in markets where there are no good alternatives. And that's true in this space and others as well. So you really want to be to identify, at least as a first go-to market, the problem, the most painful one where the current solutions are not delivering. And so I would say that that's really the key. And then the third one is the founders, and it always go back to the founder, and we'll talk about it later, but founders who are open-minded and coachable and are flexible, but also grounded in science, that would be the foundation for anything, everything.
That's super interesting. And I just want to touch on that for a little bit, because if you think about science, a lot of it, the research follows the funding. I don't know, I'm not deep enough in the academic world to know what the funding follows, but certainly there's policy, there's government funding, all that stuff. My question is, are you seeing an increase in either the number of researchers, the number of patents, or what I'll call new discoveries and inventions? Are you seeing an increase in that's driving some of this? Or is it just the other parts of it that are becoming more active and making this a more attractive space?
So I think we're going to make a distinction between academic research and then technology, because academic research is almost the source of knowledge. And the great thing about it is that it's done almost always without any commercial thought in mind. And that's what's great, right? You're doing research for the sake of research, for the sake of discovery. And then we have this tech transfer that is happening. Oh, we have this discovery. Let's see what actual problem in the real world it can solve. Regarding the funding, we're living in turbulent times. So I don't know how funding is going to be allocated for various research projects and groups and topics. But this kind of research, especially when we're speaking about the brain, it requires funding. Who's going to fund it? That's a question.
Just to go back to my question, it sounds like, at least from your perspective, the real change is happening in that transfer point where the research is there, but now the gateway to the market and gateway to commercialization is opening up. And that's what's a big part of the driving force behind all of this.
Yeah, I would say that we see more and more scientists almost organically transitioning. So again, these are not the masses, but you would see scientists and physicians who were doing research and develop technology, and now they're starting companies or they're joining companies. But again, bring this like very deep scientific rigor.
And do you have any thoughts on what's driving that? Is it just the general excitement around startups? Is there something else at play? What's happening here?
So I would quote a neuroscientist I spoke literally last week, and he is now a founder of a company in the neurotech space. And I'm not an MD, so it's not my personal opinion, but he said something and I've heard it before. So the reason for physicians to transfer into the tech side and start companies is that they feel that they can make a larger impact. If a physician or a scientist discovered something and they see that, well, if you are not a physician, if you're a scientist and you've done the research, you published the papers, you had several people read it, cited and quoted, you gave a talk at a conference, that's great. But if you think that you found something that can be used to cure or to help or to save people, that's a different kind of impact. So the impact side or the outreach is number one, and that goes both for scientists and physicians. Physicians who treat patients and they have an idea and they're onto something and they understand that this idea is scalable, and so they will be able to help many more patients than keeping their practice. So I would say that's what I'm hearing from scientists and physicians who are making this transition into the startup world.
Just one last question on that, because it's so fascinating, at least from your observation of all the physician turned entrepreneurs and the scientists turned entrepreneurs in this space. Have you been able to see any common factor or some trigger that made them wake up one day and say, hey, there's got to be a different way?
I would say those are the most curious people, but physicians and scientists, they would be curious to begin with. But the ones who are looking for change, it's, again, if you're a scientist or a physician, it's hard work. And the combination of making an impact and, now you're 50 or 60 and you've done all these things and you suddenly see something different. And this tech that we mentioned and is developing suddenly allows you to see things differently and do things differently.
So are you seeing this pattern in terms of what I call more seasoned scientists and more seasoned physicians turning into entrepreneurs?
So I see both. I see the younger physicians who had, several years of practice, and they are, and now there is this tech and we can develop a scalable solution. Or you see physicians who've been in the field for a while and they observed a phenomenon or identified the problem, and they also have a very good sense of how to solve it. They have enough experience. And so you'll see, and very often you'll see teams of scientists and physicians. You'll see someone younger, and you'll see someone who is bringing the 20, 30 years of experience in the field.
Awesome. Fascinating. I want to talk about one whole other set of subjects, which is fascinating personally to me. You mentioned earlier that you've got a PhD in consumer behavior. And this whole topic of behavioral science, I think, has a lot more applicability than people give credit for, right? You and I have talked about the fact that it has applicability to founders, even, let's say, in a B2B fintech startup, for example. Why should they care about behavioral science? And the answer is to say, well, because human behavior affects everything and people make decisions. I want to hear your view as a scientist, like specifically, why should they care?
Yeah, so I would start with saying that we're all human and we should all care. Because eventually, when you are building a startup, it's beyond the coding, beyond the science, beyond the AI. You're trying to change someone's behavior, right? Like you developed a new product and you want to sell it. You are in a process of behavioral change, whether it's for a company or individual. Behavior is the outcome. But if you want to go deeper, behavior is driven by something. And so very often we observe behavior in the business world and we attribute it to various factors. All of us as humans forget that most of the time people don't really respond to you or to the outer environment, but they respond to themselves. There is this saying that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. It's kind of philosophical, but I think we all need to keep it in mind as investors, founders, experts, and humans, because it adds another layer, another perspective to all the other practical things we're going to talk about. Let's go beyond fundraising, for example. You're a startup founder, you raise money, you develop the product, and you're approaching a sales process. So you're approaching your go-to-market, you got a meeting. And at this meeting, what most of the founders do and most of the team is doing is pitching, right? So we're telling about their product and like the solution and the tech and the AI and all the buzzwords. And we're very focused on our perspective, very natural. If you want to use that quote or take that approach to a very practical level, we need to see the world from the other side, aka from our buyer's perspective. So they don't buy our product because they like us. Well, sometimes they do, but that's not the case, right? They're buying it because it serves the purpose for them, not for us, not because we need to make the sale because our investors are waiting for their quarterly update and like we're stressed out. If they're going to buy because they have a pressing problem and whatever we are selling is the perfect solution. And so we really need to focus on the perspective of the other side and be very, very careful when we listen. I think if there is another skill, and it may sound generic and easy, but it's not, and I suggest everyone to practice, is listening. Because very often people will tell you what they need, what they think, and that's okay. The most interesting things are happening in between the lines, when people are not saying what is happening in that meeting you're at that is not being said. And so I would just, and this is an experiment. It sounds very theoretical, but like your next meeting, my next meeting, I'm actually going to do it because it's a great practice. Listen to what the other person is saying and listen to what they're not saying. You will unlock like a treasure.
So is there an example, like help me understand, I'm talking to an investor, I'm talking to a potential customer, and they're saying XYZ. No, there's always a resistance because especially if I'm selling, they know I'm selling, so the wall comes down. So they're saying all the things that hopefully will get me off their backs. How are you going to listen for things that are not saying?
I love that example. So if you're trying to sell something and they are telling you, for example, like it sounds great, but we already using company XYZ and they're doing something similar. First of all, you should come prepared and you should know what they're using. And you should know not only what they're using, but also what are the downsides or what are the weak spots. You've done your competitive analysis. Like, let's say you're selling a new software for office management. And again, that's a very random example. And you know there is a standard and the default and everybody is buying the same software for many years and you develop this new AI-powered, streamlined, you're saving time, saving money. On the surface, everybody should be like subscribing, but they're not because you have the default bias and people don't like changes and it's a hassle. And you got that meeting in the office and you're telling them about your AI capabilities and how much time it's going to save them. And like people will have time to really focus on what they should be doing. And they're like, yeah, it sounds great, but now we have a subscription to ChatGPT and our staff is starting using like this additional thing and they're offering an integration. But you've done your homework and you know that the current software has a weak spot. And the weak spot can be that their customer service is off. And every time there is something off in the system, it takes like 2 days to fix and the customers are getting upset. And that you can find this information. Again, it takes some research. So most of the founders or people who are doing the sale, especially when they're not trained enough, they would say, yeah, but they have this thing going on and they're not picking up the phone when you need. What does that automatically evoke? An objection, right?
Resistance.
Like, you're telling me that I'm working with a bad company. It means that I made a bad decision. Who are you? But what you can do, and again, we're almost doing it automatically and we need to be aware of it. You don't need to put that in front of people because they probably know that's a problem that exists. But you can always come and say, like, yeah, we know that these guys are great, but we've heard from other clients that sometimes when the system is off, they lost like 2 major customers like during the last shutdown. And I'm sure you guys work that thing out. So like you're a completely different level. So you're not pushing, you're not selling, you're opening a door. And then people might say, oh yeah, last time that happened, like it took them 3 days and our boss was so frustrated. And again, you're not selling anything. You're opening a conversation. You don't need to say, oh, it's not going to happen with us because like this is an AI system and like our assistants are 24/7. It's already there. Again, it's an experiment. You need to fine tune it. It should be super customized. It requires research. So you need to come prepared with kind of have a sense of what might be the pitfalls, but you don't want to kind of push it into people's face. You want to just be gentle, like, oh, I've heard that this is something going on and like our customers shared that, but I'm sure like you're better than that.
Awesome. I love that example. So it's almost like what you're listening for that they didn't say is, they didn't say, don't make me look like a fool. And they didn't say, don't make me feel bad about a decision I made.
You just, I think, nailed it and put it in words that I didn't in a much better way, Shuba. It's about you. We never want to make the other person feel bad, AKA when we're starting to convince someone that they need our solution, essentially people are hearing, you're a fool. You made a bad decision. the automatic reaction is resistance. What we want to say is like the other people out there might be not as smart as you are, but I'm sure you have that figured out. And then you open a conversation. You allow them to be vulnerable. You can share like your own experience. Oh yeah, when I was working with that provider and they had their shut-offs every other month, it really messed up our production and we had to switch. But you want to be empathetic and you want to make the other person feel good in a genuine way. So it's not fake. It's very easy to see when it's a fake conversation or when it's a stealth conversation. So it's not a fake conversation, but you really want to be curious and helpful. If you're coming from, I'm here to help and I'm here to serve, and that you can do something better, that's the source, that's the intention, if you wish.
I love it. So that's a great example. So with that said, we talked about the psychology and kind of how to open doors and work around the sensitive spots of our customer psyche. I want to move now to the other piece which you mentioned, which is the heuristics and biases, which is a huge area, right? So there's, I was looking at Wikipedia recently, there were like 45 biases and I'm sure it's growing every day, right? So from a founder's perspective, I know that I'm going to be subject to these. It's almost involuntary. Are there 4 or 5 that you would pick, that you would think, regardless of which industry I'm a founder in, that had big impacts on my success and my ability to take my startup forward?
And first of all, the list is very long and it's getting updated and like you have all these new phenomena and you still have the core, right? So you had Kahneman and Tversky received Nobel Prize, a prize for their research. I would say that there are, in my opinion, there are a few that we want to keep in mind and ignoring the noise of the other 45. And that's just what I've seen in the industry, both as a founder, as an investor, as an advisor, and as a human, because we keep using our titles, like I'm a founder, I'm a salesperson, I'm an advisor, I'm an investor. We're human and we bring ourselves everywhere. And so the first one I would suggest all of us to keep in mind is the status quo bias or the default bias, aka how many of us are changing the default selection on an app, on any website. You open do you accept all the cookies or you actually press the other button?
Ouch.
Ouch to all of us. And it's true for us as humans who are founders as well. So when we develop something, and let's say we are approaching a new customer and we're in a sales process, we need to keep in mind that the likelihood of people to change the status quo, so to change the status quo requires effort. If it requires effort from us to click a button, then for a company to move to a new software or to purchase a new product, it's a major change. It requires tens of meetings and people to be involved in budget, and that's a lot of hassle. So first of all, we want to make it, and that's easier said than done, but we need to be aware and try at least to work towards that, is to reduce friction. Very often we as founders, relatively small organizations, if it's a startup, if you're like 1, 2, 3, 4 people, you speak to your co-founders or co-workers over the WhatsApp and the communication is very streamlined. We forget that when we sell to a larger company or a corporation or a bank or an insurance company, the processes are much more complex, many more people involved, and we don't always plan for that. So I would say as a founder, as you are preparing to start selling, figure out the decision-making process in the organization you're approaching. And as you're approaching it, to start reducing the friction before you are even at the door. Again, it requires some work on the back end, and some of the information will not be on Google or on your favorite AI, and you'll need to speak to people from the industry. But once you understand that, there is a budget meeting that is happening every first week of the month, and so if you're bringing something on the second week, it will have to wait, and it will pile up, and it will be at the end of the list, and it will add so much friction. You may want to pace yourself and align your timeline with the timeline of the organization. Again, because it's so much easier to stay what we currently have. So reduce friction because the default is always easier for humans and organizations. That's kind of number one.
So I'm going to dig in a little bit into that because I think founders, we understand it, but we don't understand it at the action level, right? So first thing I heard was reduce friction. First of all, that goes against what the founder's tendency is, which is to say, hey, we're so great, we're so great. It's pushing the positive as opposed to trying to remove the negative. What I'm hearing you say is, don't worry so much about the positive, that will take care of itself. But what's really going to kill your sale is all of the icebergs, right? All the hidden frictions. Question is, what are the specific actionable insights or pieces of advice that you have? And where are those points of friction that tend to blindside founders the most in their journey?
I think I have a very practical suggestion here. You may want to consider to start with a pilot. Don't go and suggest, again, we're taking an example of some sort of organizational software where you have an organization of 10,000 employees. That's huge. Start with a pilot. You want to make it easy for the other party to say yes. Because the status quo and because we want to reduce friction, let's run a small pilot. Let's install it in like this one department and see and run it for a month or 2 or 3, whatever it does. And you don't need to make any decision now. You don't need to make any commitment now. If you feel it doesn't work, again, no friction. You're going back. You don't need to change your contract with the other company. Let's see if that works. Like you want to make it really easy. And what's really easy, and it comes from the academic world where it's much more complicated there, but it's an experiment. If we're speaking about B2B, you need to find the person who is going to be your champion. And again, easier said than done, but that's how you get in. The person who is looking for a better solution, who is more open-minded, curious, maybe they just landed the job and like their job is to bring the spirit of innovation. So they are on the outlook for new solutions. But don't start with a revolution. Always start, let's have an experiment. It's much easier to say, yeah, let's try this. Instead of, oh, we're replacing now all our organizational software to this like new startup that we don't even know if it's going to work. Once you get your foot at the door, it's much easier. You're already there, you're learning. And if it's not working, then it's not working. But you're saying thank you, it was an experience, and you still have hopefully positive relationships because eventually everything is about relationships. You ask for something practical, offer an experiment. Like every customer you meet, if there is this person who you see that are more open for a conversation, don't sell. Offer an experiment. And another thing, and this is also to keep in mind, every time a medium company is working with a startup, they are taking huge risk. It doesn't feel like risk to the founder because as a founder, you spend 24/7 on your company, your product, everything inside out. For an organization, especially a more traditional one, a startup is like this ball of red flags, right? So it's like risk. And so again, you have the default kick in, and your job is to de-riskify. And to de-riskify, you want to reduce friction and you want to offer an experiment because the risk of an experiment is significantly lower than a risk of an organizational change.
Before we dive back into our conversation, I want to tell you about Seed to Success. Seed to Success is our community letter with our proprietary insights on startup financial storytelling, tips, new episodes, and much more. If you find these discussions helpful in your entrepreneurial journey, use the link in the description to subscribe to Seed to Success today and get all of these and much more straight to your inbox every week. Now, back to our conversation. One other thought that occurred to me when you were talking about frictions is, as a founder, I'm wondering if you can take that journey that your customer needs to take from the moment they see you in your first meeting. What are all the things, right? The budget meetings, and then they'll get their compliance department to say yes, and they've got to do this. Does it help, or have you seen examples where a founder can map out literally that journey and then figure out what are those big burning friction points and then just kind of try to figure out where they can reduce the friction? And obviously what you told us in terms of the scheduling meetings around the budgets and, the experiments are two great examples.
I think what you just said is essential to any founder who is trying to make their way into the market. You need to understand the sales cycle and who is involved in the process. Because you'd be surprised or not, anyone who ever worked in a large organization, it's the same organization, but very often different departments have their own views, their own goals, their own motivations. Again, same organization, but different interests. And so it's almost a must to map out all the internal stakeholders and try again. It requires some work on the back end, but it pays off because then you are informed and you're not like, pitching or selling, and you're surprised, right? That like suddenly the legal department or the IT are not that excited like about this new software that like the accounting team wants to purchase because that creates like a completely new hassle for them and they weren't prepared. So you really want to map out the stakeholders and you want to map out their objections if you can. And again, it takes some research, but today almost everything is doable and you can reach the information from other organizations that are similar. And you can use their KPIs or what are they valued for? Like the IT department needs to keep the organization safe, or like the cybersecurity. When you're coming to a meeting and there are 5 different people there, speak to every one of them from their angle. And it goes back to like you need to understand their need, not the fact that you need to close the deal, but the fact that IT is concerned with cyber breaches. And so you need to have a sentence there saying, like we're using this and this security and like compliant with XYZ. And so they will be like, okay, like it's not a problem. And you need to say same sentence for HR or accounting or whoever is in the room. Again, it's the things that are not said in the meeting. Maybe no one will say anything, but the sale will not happen because the IT after the meeting will be like, we don't know if they're compliant with whatever regulation. Like it's critical. It's like fundamental or foundational for a successful show.
Got it. And what I found most insightful in this whole discussion that it's a new view of the purchase process, not as a purchase process, but as a series of friction points so that you as a founder can look at it in terms of what do I need to do to reduce the friction at every point so that I'm giving myself and my product a better chance at overcoming this default bias, which you just talked about.
Absolutely. How do I make it easy for each one of these stakeholders to say yes? Sometimes you cannot know, but very often, like the vast majority of them are general enough at least to get to the next meeting. And when you're addressing them, it goes beyond sale, right? You're showing that you understand the company, that you understand the business, and you're just increasing the chance of an experiment, a pilot, or a sale. Because there are all these other 5 guys in the room and or ladies, the group of stakeholders who are like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but the IT guy has his things down the line where it's going to cause more work, and the accounting and the HR, and they're all like, yeah, it sounds good, but no, like they don't get our business. They don't understand the complexity. And you're coming in, just like you said, like you've done your research, you understand the friction point, and you say it up front. I know that very often, again, our customers are concerned with like cyber side of the software, and to solve that, we already partner with company XYZ and we have this certification. So kind of dealing with all these frictions ahead of a time means you see them, you hear them, like you're already a partner.
So we talked about default bias. What's next on the list that you think founders should be aware of? What are the other big ones?
I would say that one of the big ones, and it comes great with messaging, is loss aversion. When we speak about founders and we speak about startups, very often we hear the message of, we're going to help you to grow your audience. We're going to help you to grow your revenue. We're going to help you to achieve something. What happens with loss aversion, and that's one of the key, the foundational kind of effects out there, is that we as humans, apparently, despite the fact that it's illogical, we hate loss much more than we love win. And it also plays out in the startup world. We can take an example from messaging, and again, goes back to pitches and sales, right? So when you're saying, my company is gonna help you to acquire new customers. It's like, okay, I might do that. But when you're saying my company is saving you a loss of 5 customers each day, it's different, because when you own something, you hate losing. When you have customer service or any basically customer-faced business or startup, you have churn, right? Like you have losing customers and you have retention. You can increase retention or you can reduce churn. Which one you're going to use? It's the same thing. The meaning is the same. Like the outcome is the same. You're increasing retention or you're reducing churn. The question is, what's going to be more effective?
But do you think that's really true in companies? Because I want to push back on that a little bit, because when you think about people, in these positions, I don't know to what extent they're going to be incentivized by preventing losses of existing customers and how much they're going to get bonused on getting new customers, right? Do you think there's an interplay there where it might mess with how that effect is working out?
So I would say that effect, again, it's very strong. It comes back to messaging, and messaging works. You're asking if it's going to work every time. Definitely not. But it happens almost automatically when we frame something in terms of losing. Like every day you're not using this software, you're losing 5 potential customers. Instead of every day you're going to gain 5 potential customers. Just even how it lands. Like I was saying it, yeah, I'm losing 5 customers every day if I'm not buying this, or I'm gaining. Again, that's how our brain's wired. You're asking me if that's going to be the only reason someone is going to buy a software or a device? No. But if it adds up to a good product, a good solution, all the other ducks are in a row, it can be a cherry on top, just in the way people think about it.
So are there other examples in terms, like maybe the less obvious examples of where loss aversion plays in a founder's day or journey that you think would be better put to use?
The example that I suggested were kind of for the outer communication, right? But it applies also to founders inside. I think the other way to look at it is, where do I, as a founder, see things or address things or buy into things when they are framed around loss and not around gain?
Interesting.
Because we are also human. And as founders, you are also constantly being sold to, right? And so because this is so powerful, again, this is just something to be very mindful of when you want to buy something or like go into a deal or do something for your company. Is it because you're afraid of losing? Like when you're doing that mapping in your brain, it can change your, again, it's an experiment. Try that. It can change your decision. The same way it can change other people's decisions.
Is there an example that comes to mind?
Well, we can use the same example, right? If I'm a founder and I want to hire a marketing director and I interview people and they're all like showing me their portfolios and telling me what they're going to help me achieve. And there are people who are speaking with me about customer acquisition, right? So like, you're going to hire me, we're going to build this strategy and this campaign, and like your customer acquisition base will be 5,000 customers per week. And you will have someone who will say the same thing, but they will be like, every day I'm not on board with you, you're losing 5,000 customers per week.
Never heard anyone pitching themselves in a.
Well, maybe we gave someone an idea, but try again. It is very strong, and when it's used in a correct way, again, when it doesn't sound like pitching, like, yeah, sure, you don't have to hire me. But like, listen, you're leaving every week 5,000 new customers out there, like going to your competitors. As long, it's okay. I have my...
Yeah, I have to be honest. If somebody pitched themselves like that, I would find it very hard to turn them down just by way of how you're like, do I want to walk away from that kind of money? So your point is extremely well taken, right? So note to all the folks out there that are trying to get hired. Great tip. Here's how much you're losing by not hiring me, right? So that's a really cool one.
Well, I think we keep forgetting that we're all human and we're all subjected to the same biases. So it goes both ways, and we should be aware and we can use it when needed.
Absolutely. So we talked about default bias, and then we can kind of in loss aversion build on that. Are there other biases that founders can make good use of and be aware of?
Yeah, I would say confirmation bias. We are looking almost automatically as humans for information or people who will confirm our original thought, belief, or whatever we're seeking. So our brain will almost automatically choose the people who are writing positive recommendations and are cheering for us and are like very enthusiastic, and it will all support our narrative. It's very difficult again for us as humans to go the other way and focus on the people who are not choosing us and the things that are not working. And so on the one hand, like we need a positive mindset, and right, we want to be supported and we want to focus on those who chose us. On the other side, it goes back to the things that are not said, right? So like I had a customer who bought my product. I have a customer who didn't. If I only focus on those who did, it's good, like I'm going to get somewhere. If I will be able to have a conversation with the guy or the company, the lady who didn't, I'd suggest that you'll get much further quicker. And the reason being, when you understand why not, it helps you to understand why yes and to double down. I just wanted to link it to our previous conversation to be able to go back to an organization that didn't buy your product. If you did like everything we said before, and they're like, sounds good, but not, you still develop sort of relationship and trust. They're like, these guys get us, like, it's not the right timing. We don't have the budget, but you might feel more comfortable. But even if not, they might be much more open to respond to your question. Again, if you're not come attacking and be like, guys, I loved what you're doing. Like, I know it might not be a good timing. I just love 5 more minutes, 10 minutes, a coffee, a call, just to learn better. Like, what do you really love about the current product? Or like, why didn't I want to learn? Come curious, come learn. If you are coming not from, oh, they didn't buy my product, like my ego is hurt, and people have the tendency to go into this loop, but you're coming from a curiosity standpoint, and you're not looking for things that will confirm that what you're doing is right, but like you're curious, well, maybe I missed something here. It will completely change the way you sell, grow, and move forward.
So at a mental or an intellectual level, I understand what you're saying, right? But I can tell you, at least from personal experience, it's really hard to go back and hear those tough messages. And as a founder, already you're hearing all day, every day about all the 99,000 reasons why your startup isn't going to work. That's number one. And then secondly, there's a lot of people who will tell you things that aren't true or are not data backed, for lack of a better word, right? That are not credible, that are not substantive. So as a founder, what should you do to make sure that you're using those opportunities to seek the right disconfirming evidence in a way that doesn't destroy your self-confidence, but still gives you actionable information?
First of all, I think you're absolutely right. As founders, we're here most of the day, no. And many founders, I'm not seeking more constructive feedback. And again, I get it. I was a founder that's really it's emotionally, it's very nuanced and complex. And I would say it sucks. But you're doing all this work and hard work, and you really believe in what you're doing, and something is not working out there. I'm not a therapist, but I would say it's really a quick change of mindset, because you're not seeking bad feedback. You're curious, right? Because we're all going just the same way we're going into defense when someone is attacking us. That's a rejection feels like an attack. So we're blocking all valuable information. And so if we come into the table and we're asking for a conversation, we're not asking what is wrong with our product, but we're curious to find out what is going on, what are the processes. It's a mindset of curiosity. I know it sounds vague, but again, this is something that when you start practicing, it opens an entirely different conversation. Very often a company that doesn't close a deal, they're like, oh, these guys are back. They want to sell more. So there is the resentment from both ends. But when the outrage is like, guys, I really enjoyed the meeting, totally get it that, it might not be a good fit and not product. Would you be open for like 5-10 minutes conversation, just have a couple of questions? We're trying to figure something out. You're asking for advice, you're asking for help. People like to help. And so when you're giving them an opportunity to help, they know you're not expecting anything. You are much more likely to actually hear feedback that will be valuable and genuine and not something that was just thrown at you. So, as a hard rejection. Because hard rejections very often, like, we don't learn anything. We don't know what didn't work. Like, we can guess, but our guesses are, as good as our guesses. So that's one part. The other, and it's not directly related, but I would still say it, is that many people like giving advices, right? So, like, people are full of ideas, full of advice, and here we're speaking and sharing all these thoughts and ideas, and you should do this and that. Like, first of all, talking is always easier than doing. So that's number one. And we all should keep that in mind, right? So when you listen to a podcast, not in the business space, but the health podcast, and everybody, you should be awake by 6 a.m., take a walk, then like drink your water, exercise. Like, yeah, I don't see how that works out like with my lifestyle. It's a great advice, but it just doesn't seem to work for me. So take all advice, including this one, with a grain of salt, aka most people are speaking from their experience. So I wouldn't completely generalize feedback. That's number one. So if someone is like, your product is completely terrible, it doesn't do what we need, and that's like completely off, you feel that the feedback is not genuine because people want to really share something, but they're just frustrated with whatever is going on, don't take it. Like, you don't need to take every feedback. Not good one and not bad one, by the way. But when you see a company you saw that it would be a really good fit and something didn't work, but you came in prepared and like you had a good conversation and the deal didn't come through, it might be, and again, it's a cliche, but a learning opportunity and a relationship building step, because you never know who's going to leave the company, start a new one, which department is going to change. So it's really, again, curious and a relationship building, because things are moving so quickly and people are moving. And if you were there, present, curious, interesting, respectful, like with a good solution, the guy that didn't purchase, or the lady or whatever, the company that didn't hire you now may do it in 2 or 3 months when they are in their next phase. But that's more in a relationship building. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing here is, because it's so emotionally costly to hear disconfirming evidence, what I heard you say, if I had to like rephrase it, what I think I heard you say is, make sure that the sources that you seek disconfirming evidence are very, very credible sources and high value sources, number one. And then number two, frame your question for disconfirming evidence in a way that makes it easier for you to hear. As in, what is it about you that makes it difficult to take our product, or whatever the case might be? And number three, position some kind of mental trick to make it feel like an experiment and somehow detach yourself from it personally, so that it's more objective and being talked about something else that's not you personally. Those are the three main takeaways I got in terms of how to use this or how to mitigate this confirmation bias. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, more than fair, I would say that the last part of disattach yourself is probably number one, because as founders, we tend to take it's personal, right? It's our company. It's like a personal rejection. And we all keep forgetting it, but it's not personal 99% of the time. Like, it's the product or whatever it is. Most of the time, it's not about you as a person. And it's on us, on the founder, to keep reminding, and because only then you will be actually open to hear feedback that you can implement and use, and it can be valuable. But yeah, that's the most important part.
Awesome. I know that we've got a lot to cover. So any last words on biases before we move on to our next subject, which I also want to talk to you about?
Well, you can read the list on Wikipedia, like the 44 or 5 versions. use your favorite AI to summarize them. But I think the overarching kind of idea is be aware that it exists and be aware that it works both ways, that it's there and you can use them as a tool and work around them or make them work for you. And also be aware when you are making decisions that are biased. And so like it's not the decision you wanted to make, but you're making it because of a specific framing, because of a specific angle and how it changes your decision. So it's really like, be aware, like know that it's there. Sometimes like just having that in the back of your mind is already a major shift because most of us are walking around like, yeah, we are very objective and logical and like, we're not affected by these things. And we are for the most part.
And I have one last question on that question of bias, right? So I've read a couple of books on bias. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me is even when people have received bias training or aware of their bias, it's very hard to overcome it. So let's say that you're coming from a place where typically you have the negative position or you're in an unfavorable position because of a specific bias, right? For whatever the case, homophily bias, whatever the case might be. Knowing that I'm talking to you, you have this bias against me, I still need to sell this product or get this money from you as an investor. Are there things I can do to minimize bias where I have very little control over how you think?
I think that's being an important question. I would say that on the one hand, I didn't do the academic research and didn't collect the data. At some point, I think we all need to accept that not everybody gonna like us or love our product or buy or invest. There is this, again, saying like, I'm not a $100 bill. Not everybody has to like me. And that's okay. Looking for some common ground when people are not like explicitly biased against category of people, you almost always can find something that connects you on a human level and that shared human experience, whether it's a cliche, but I don't know, like cheering for the same team, having kids at the same age, being from a similar, like loving the same type of food, anything that shows that the two of you, despite the fact that completely different groups, completely different categories, share something in common, tends to kind of quiet the category bias. Because if you look, biases against communities are like very generalized, right? This community is something. So when we're taking the label of community or these people or female founders or like international and whatever it is, from it's not like female founder, it's like it's Shuba or it's Maria. It's like, oh no, she actually started a company and like she killed it, right? So taking it from the general to the personal, I think it's a good advice, in any human relationship, and especially when it comes to kind of working with people who might be slightly biased.
So I just conclude with one. I don't know if you read this. I recently read a news item about a research study where they found that by assigning people to any kind of random group, right? Like pick two groups of people and call the one group the blues and the other group the reds. And even that completely random grouping, because I belong to the blues, then I automatically prefer all the blues because they're my group, right? Even though it is so random and it's based on some color, right? That has nothing to do with anything.
Exactly. And I think this is so powerful, and it shows to what extent we're all affected by things that on the paper should have zero impact, because here, like this group, it doesn't have any meaning, but it does because we assign meaning. Again, it happens almost automatically. It's not that someone is thinking, oh, I was assigned to a blue group, but things are happening. We need to be aware. And that's why the way to overcome is like, oh, I'm also at the blue
I'm one of the blue group people. Right? You're a blue group. I'm a blue group. Love it. Love it. Thank you. So the last set of topics I wanted to talk about is around founders. They need to raise money from VCs. Just want to talk about from your perspective, you've been a founder, now you're a VC. Like, what are the things that founders should think about in terms of the overall VC relationship that you think get forgotten, especially post sort of first funding? Are there long-term principles that you think founders should keep in mind even before they go get that first check?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I would start with founders keep in mind that investors are people. Investors keep in mind that founders are people. And so that's Again, cliche, everybody knows that. When a founder is coming to pitch a VC, they are in a pitching mode. VC is in almost like best case scenario listening mode, worst case scenario like panel judging mode. Both sides are aware of that. That's step number one. You're building relationships. Every founder that meets an investor, it's a potential investor, it's a potential champion, it's a potential resource, it's a potential friend, right? So when you are meeting, and I'm saying it then goes both ways to founders and to VCs. The mindset of I'm going to meet this person, yes, they have a company and they're fundraising, but even if I'm not investing, I love the idea, I can help them. I know someone I can introduce them to. I might be able to give them an advice. For that to happen, the founder needs to remember that it is a pitch, but it's a conversation. So I would say, if we want to distill it, less pitching, more conversation. Make it a dialogue rather than, again, sales pitch. Like I build that, that's the best next thing. Like you should write me a check.
I'm very curious because I just this morning listened to like 5 or 6 pitches of startup founders, and every single case they sounded so rehearsed. It just struck me the wrong way, saying, I don't want to hear your speech. I don't get a sense of who you are as a person. Do you see that a lot? And does that impact you as an investor when you're...
The vast majority of investors are finding or curating their pipeline. It's a conversation. An investor is a person, so you might be curious about them. They might be curious about you. When it's a conversation, the chances that you will start building relationship that will end up with an investment, most likely it's not going to happen, right? Like the vast majority, first of all, only 2% of startups, I think, getting VC money. That's the stat. So like when you approach it, like it's not completely selling. When I meet this person, I want to tell them about what I'm doing. I want to hear their feedback because they might see more companies in this space and like they might have some thoughts that I didn't have and they might have advice. And by the way, like, if they really like what I'm doing and they believe in it, they can also write a check. So I would really address meetings with VCs as, especially the first one, you're there to set the foundation for a relationship. And your goal is to get to the next meeting. Know what you're doing, like be really sharp about your startup and why and the company and what are you doing, why it's important, what is the market, know your numbers, know your competitors, but also like use this meeting as a resource. Like what can you learn from the person who is probably seeing at least 10 similar companies every week? Like what do they know that you don't?
So what I'm hearing you say is, even if you're pitching at a competition or if you're having a one-on-one conversation, look at everything as a start of a long-term relationship, regardless of what the outcome is. And if you have a relationship, that's the positive outcome versus, and if you get funding, then that's the bonus, but it's not the expected outcome. It's kind of what I'm hearing you say. Is that a fair assessment of what you just said?
Absolutely. Every meeting is a potential for building relationships, and you never know who the person you're meeting or you're pitching to knows, right? So it might be that this fund, like, it's not relevant to their portfolio. They don't have money to invest now, but that's their ecosystem, right? So like if I met a founder and I loved what they're doing and I believe in the product, no, I know the space, I know the problem. I might give them a few thoughts. I saw how they responded. That all worked well. I might not invest, but I will introduce them to either other founders or investors, or so you never know like what this initial conversation, where it's going to lead. You're a founder. You will end up raising. You will be hiring people. Like, so putting this foundation early on, it's an ecosystem.
Got it. And then you were speaking of what the investors think about. Is there like one invisible filter that VCs or investors use that you think founders are not aware of? What is that filter and how should founders think about the impact of that filter?
I would say there are two. Again, there are probably many more. I would say the ones that I found founders be less aware of. Very often, especially early stage, ideas change, business models change, go-to-market strategies change. You evaluate the person, right? The founder company fit, the founder market fit. And to some extent, we cannot really evaluate the character, but at least to what extent the founder is accepting advice or other opinions or coachable or pushing back. And if you're an angel investor, you're investing in a company, you're investing in a person. And that's why I said, when you meet someone, show who you are beyond the pitch. Be a person. If you're curious, ask questions. If you're empathetic, be empathetic. But be the human that you are, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. And you want to be flexible, have a flexible mind. Founder's journey, again, you know that as a founder, it requires so much mental flexibility. And it's relatively easy to test even during or to sense if you've spoken with enough people during a conversation. And I think that's one of probably most important character traits for founders, because if you're not mentally flexible, things are changing by the hour. So that's one. The second, if you're pitching to a fund, you think they have whatever number of millions, you have no idea how much of the fund they are already deployed or committed or raised. This is not an information that funds have to disclose. And so you might be a perfect fit, but they already committed all their capital. Or you might be a great fit, but they now need one of their portfolio companies need extra support. So it's not about you. And so this information is more nuanced to obtain, and it's not always publicly. I don't think it's ever publicly available unless it's a completely public fund. But be aware that, especially if you're getting into the first meeting and second and third, and you feel you're getting there, ask. And this is something that you can ask. So it might not be a first meeting question, but as a founder, you can ask, are you guys currently deploying capital? Yeah, they don't have to respond, but that's also for you as a founder. You should be knowing who you're taking money from, because it goes both ways, right? Good investors can help you to go through the turbulent ride and be supportive and be of an asset. Bad investors can ruin the company, and there are plenty of examples out there. So it's a legit question to ask. Again, maybe not first meeting, but definitely second. See the response.
If you had to wrap up and say, hey, here are some 3 really actionable, non-obvious things that you don't see out here normally, rules or actionable tips for a founder to work effectively with an investor of any kind, what would those be?
First one, address every meeting, treat every meeting as an opportunity to build relationship. You have no idea how life are going to turn out, who's going to leave what company. I've seen so many people finding jobs, getting investors, partners, friends, just from all these meetings because they showed up. So that's firstly, it's a meeting, it's a business meeting. You need to be super professional. You need to be on top of your game, but you also need to be human. That's where magic happens. Number 2, you want to demonstrate flexibility. When you speak, when you describe what you're doing, you can talk about pivots that you had with your product. And in fact, I think it's very important to show that you are open-minded and flexible, because I think this is one trait that is must-have for founders. And I'm looking for it. So if it's not there and it's not demonstrated and I cannot read it between the lines or somewhere in the journey, it would be something that I would love to dig in, because again, it's a must-have. It's almost a non-optional. And the third one is, don't be afraid to ask the question is whether you're deploying capital. Ask this question, don't be afraid, because it's a two-way street. These are relationships. You should be able to ask questions just like the investor. So again, it's a conversation. Relationship goes both ways.
Awesome. So this has been a pretty amazing conversation. I've heard a lot of things that I haven't heard before, especially from your expertise in behavioral science. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be on here. And I'm sure I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fascinating for me as well. I think the way you kind of distilled the insights is I think I'm going to take notes after listening to the episode from your summaries, because I think these are the highlights. So thank you for doing that.
Glad that worked out. Thanks. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care. And that's a wrap for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you find these conversations helpful in your own journey, please subscribe to Seed to Success, our weekly community letter with tips, insights, resources, and more. If you have any other questions relating to startup finance or financial storytelling, send them over to me at chakras@achieve.co. That's chakras@achiiv.co. We'll see you on the next episode of Invisible Ink. Now, go achieve!